and Nadja going to present knowledge, skill, and senses. And Nadja, are you able to share the screen? Is
Yes.
it possible?
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Good. One moment.
Great.
So you see my screen now?
Yes.
Good, perfect. Yeah, good morning. I also had my coffee, and thank you for the very challenging organization of this conference. And welcome to Knowledge, Skill, and Senses. Just for Michael, when I speak about the Chain Operatoire, I don't think of your advanced Chain Operatoire, but the normal one. Okay. Yeah, I will start with a definition of the keywords. And during the presentation, I will revise this definition. After the definition, I will speak about how our modern relationship to skill is influencing our archaeological work. After George Lakoff, you know, we find concepts underlying this relationship in our language, in metaphors. And as you are aware, in the past of our discipline, the modern concept time is money, for example, led to calculations of labor force and output for ancient societies, and generally to the evaluation of crafted products according to efficiency. As I think archaeology don't do such calculations anymore, I will engage in another and still problematic concept about the separation of body and mind. And we already heard a lot of it in previous talks in this conference. And then I will take an everyday phenomenon to further explain our relationship to skill, the DIY, the do-it-yourself movement. And in a third and final part, using the example of Roman commonware, I will present to you the benefits of long-term collaborations with craftspeople as a way to bypass the mentioned problems and at least to understand the term skill in my opinion, in a holistic way. There's not one knowledge. There are many kinds of knowledge. For today, we focus on the cognitive knowledge and the body knowledge, formerly described as the what to do and the how to do. The what to do is structured through language and therefore discursive. This is the part we describe with a chain operatoire. The how to do is embodied, and we grasp it with, well, that is when it starts to get very tricky, isn't it? And to gain skill, you must acquire both types of knowledge and train repeatedly the second one in harmony with the values and the role models of our social environment. As you do so, you create a new identity as a potter, a cook, an artist, a smith, a tailor, or an IT expert within your social background. So it is possible to understand this concept as I presented here, but in this way, it is also wrong. Although it gives the body a place in the acquisition of skill, it uses still the separation, or at least a hierarchy between mind and body, between cognitive and embodied knowledge. One of our modern Western concepts since the middle of the 17th century. Knowledge is power, we say. And by this we mean information that others do not have. It's not about non-discursive power. We don't say skill is power, for example. But we make this separation because it's our concept. And just mentioning the body doesn't change it. In neuroanthropology today, there are several researchers who defy the hierarchy. As Carl Friston states, our brain is part of the body, trivial as it may sound. Not a computer, but 100% organic. Our brain samples information through the body, through the senses, under all the imperatives that having a body implies. Every increase in embodied knowledge will create the ability to reflect on it. This in turn creates new discursive knowledge. And therefore, both fields of knowledge are closely intertwined, and a separation is just caused by the lack of suitable ways to communicate it. But maybe we can take a bypass and then adapt our language. How are craftspeople doing this? How do they communicate skill and knowledge? In craft apprenticeship, the what to do and the how to do are taught and trained equally, while intensively observing masters, imitating them and repeat the performance and again, observe, imitate, repeat it again and again. And in every round, the apprentice will perceive more while watching the master. Not only subtle gestures, but also the interplay and the timing of these gestures during the dialogue with the materiality, the different kinds and rhythms of concentration and relaxation, the decoupling of thinking and movement or intending and doing, the smell of risk when the laws of nature are pushed to an edge, and the inner strength needed to welcome this risk. Once experienced, knowledge is irreversible. Once trained, skill can hardly be overwritten and certainly not forgotten. If the ceramist and author Edmund de Waal describes how it should feel like when working at the wheel, he uses phrases like, "The walls grow taller and the volume changes like an exhalation, something being said." As I'm surely not a master, but also do throw vessels on the wheel, I absolutely understand what he means. But I understand it with my fingertips, as the sentence evokes a certain feeling there. Further, he wrote about the information he gains by touching an archaeological artifact, in this case, a Chinese porcelain bowl from the 12th century. The touching of the bowl happens in the present tense, and it is itself a continuous presence of active dynamic movements, judges and decisions. It doesn't feel in the past, and it feels wrong to forge it into one just to obey a critical orthodoxy. This bowl was made by someone I didn't know in conditions that I can only imagine, for functions that I may have got wrong. But the act of reimagining it by picking it up is an act of remaking. It is meant very similar when Aki Skumas, and he's here today, a master of different crafts who works in collaboration with Nikos Papadimitrios and Maria Delaki, says about studying archaeological things. It is important for a craftsman to have contact with his brother's soul from the very past. This is not sentimental. It expresses a form of a holistic communication transported by touching a thing. So is the non-discursive knowledge so completely non-discursive? I let this question open, and I will tell you later about learning a new language from craftspeople. And since this is the skill and embodiment session, the points presented were probably already familiar. Now I would like to address the second modern concept of which we are probably less aware. The attitude is expressed in the phenomenon of the DIY, the do-it-yourself movement. Starting in the USA, the movement initially included maintenance and improvement of household and house construction without the involvement of experts. Here you see the Friedland DIY kit for doorbell installation of 1963, and the cover of the journal Selbst ist der Mann, of 62 reused as cover by Jonathan Voges for his dissertation. The movement arrived Middle Europe in the 60s and was supported by the two pioneer warehouse companies Hornbach and Obi. It can be described as a development to democratize technical knowledge. The Tesa company summarized this new trend with their slogan in an advertisement in the year 62, kein Mann von Fach und trotzdem Fachmann, meaning be an expert without being an expert. Literature using step-by-step instruction and later picture by picture or video pretended to substitute apprenticeship. A whole range of new products was created and flooded the waiting market. For example, non-dripping wall paint or video camera accessory for home cinema effects or ceramic preforms to paint your crockery individually. The needed amount of skill went into the invention and development of foolproofed, prefabricated and perfected components. Specialized equipment replaced the all-round tool. Former fields of expertise like carpentry, weaving, stoneworking were transformed to leisure time activities with the benefit of feeling able and independent. Cause and effect of the movement was the depreciation of expertise, the loss of confidence regarding artisanal know-how, and the increased desire for autonomy. It would lead too far to discuss the social historical background. But yeah, and I absolutely do not judge the movement. But I think it is important to recognize our relation to craftsmanship or artisanal skill and how the concept behind the movement is influencing archaeological experiments. My company, Archaeolytics, consults various institutions on the setup of archaeological experiments and suitable archaeometric analysis methods. More often than you think, we have to discuss that the use of modern components like industrial clays or tools out of tungsten carbide and cobalt alloys may totally spoil the result, depending on the question. If you want to find out about skill, you need to work with matter which is able to provoke some use of skill. A perfectly prepared clay or a diamond saw is not comparable to archaeological raw material or tools and will lack a lot of its original characteristics. And as it is paradox, but today's easy availability of components in the hobby shop makes us forget that the real raw material may be right on our doorstep. And it is the same with expertise. As we are used to know how things work because there's probably a manual somewhere, we forget that a real and trained expert may tell us a lot more if we are able to understand what we see. Finally, I would like to present a case study on wheel-thrown Roman commonware on the 2nd century from a pottery workshop in the Vicus Kempraten at Lake Zurich. During my PhD at the University of Zurich, I decided on a long-term collaboration with a pottery school and some freelance potters to cover different degrees of appropriation. As I myself had worked as and with craftspeople for many years, it was my aim to include non-discursive knowledge and to act as a translator between crafts and science. I spent a lot of time observing and listening and reflecting, a time that was worth every second. We talked about today's apprenticeship, how appropriation can be evaluated, which characteristics make a vessel difficult, how apprentices grow into their new identity as ceramists and grow into new bodies. I brought Roman vessels and I watched potters talking about them, mostly without words. And we made copying experiments with a class of apprentices. I learned the evaluation of the level of difficulty of my Roman vessels. This is what you see here in the figure. And this is the precondition of evaluating skill level which was used, the skill level which was used. You have to know what is needed first to find out what was used. Here you see the pattern of needed skill in the chain operator for a very easy bowl in dark blue and a complex vessel in light blue. And just for the comparison, the pattern for today's DIY pottery. And you see the shift of the needed skill. I learned to recognize whether the ability of moving both arms simultaneously and independently under constant pressure was already perfected or not, or if the proprioception needed more training. I learned that good enough is a parameter. I learned whether the mass distribution was judged soundly or not, whether the centering would be preserved until the end of the process or not. Is it a beginner's mistake or a routine error you see here? I think I feel whether the maker was used to or just daring to take a risk and play gravity and adhesion to the very edge. I learned to recognize the refusal of the clay to a stubborn maker. And I learned to listen very seriously to Akiskumas, Edmund de Waal, or all the other craftspeople. So let me define the term skill again. Skill is the dialogue between human and matter, varying in its quality due to the degree of appropriation gained through observation, imitation, and practical repetition. It is a physical cognitive performance inspired by the language of the matter. And finally, do we really need another definition? So let me finish with an impression of my first semester as a student of archaeology. The well-known late geometric Dipylon amphora, a symbol of finest artisanal skill, which had blown me away. If we allow access to a complete form of knowledge into our science, we will be able to feel the tension of the shape in our fingertips as we gently glide over its surface with our eyes. We will be able to feel the effortless concentration playing with materiality. And we feel in our spine the mental balance that this vessel demands from its human co-worker. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you, Nadja. I'm sorry I was late with my technical equipment. Are there direct questions to Nadja's approach? And please write it in the chat or speak up. Simply raise your hand. Matteo?
Hello, thank you, Nadja, for your presentation. I wanted just to make a very short statement, which I think that Nadja's approach is very nice and complementary to an extent to a traditional archaeological experimental approach to pottery making. Because for what I understood, she offers she offers the eye of the artisan to an extent, how a true artisan can contribute to the exploration of skills, embodiment, and pottery making. And I think that so mixing this approach with our more, would say, traditional approach to this experiential field, it would be really useful. I mean, in terms of exploration of resources and embodiments and so on. Wanted just to say this thing. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you, Matteo. Mark has another question. Mark, I can't see you.
I'm here again.
Here.
I was very interested in Nadja's story about becoming an apprentice during her studies, because as I've been listening to the various presentations this morning, it occurs to me that all archaeology students go through a form of apprenticeship when they go on archaeological excavation. Now, I was very fortunate. It was a long time ago and things were different, but I learned to excavate before I went to university. And I learned to feel the earth through the trowel, through my fingers. I could hear differences in the soil. The trowel in my hand became an extension of 4 of the 5 senses. I don't think I ever put the earth in my mouth, so I didn't use all 5 senses. I only used 4 of them. And I wondered, Nadja, I'm sure when you were a student, you also went on excavation. How did the learning on the excavation, the apprenticeship of archaeological digging, compare to the apprenticeship of the pottery making?
In my time as a student, I actually had 3 weeks at an excavation. This was the case in the University of Heidelberg. And I have to say that it was completely different than everything I did with crafts before I was a crafts person before studying archaeology. Because in a crafts apprenticeship, you also talk a lot, but when you start to touch your material, you stop talking and try to communicate with your body. And teachers are there to translate what they see, what you are doing. They will tell you if the communication is maybe not perfect. They will touch your spine and say, look, here is the problem, and you know what they are saying, but not in the first day, and not after 3 weeks, and not after half a year. You need much more time than I had as a student of archaeology in excavating experiences. Much more time.
No, I understand that. And of course, that's the difference between my generation and younger generations.
Yeah.
You know, in my generation, we did a lot of excavation.
Mm-hmm.
I started when I was 16. I'd learned to excavate before I became a student. But don't you think it's interesting that we've lost that apprenticeship in archaeological practice? You only did 3 weeks. And as you say, that's not enough.
No.
Don't you think that's an interesting thing, that archaeology has thrown away the skill and the apprenticeship and the learning of that practical knowledge at the same time as you and Michael and all the colleagues speaking today are rediscovering the importance of skill learning to understand the archaeological artifact?
I can only speak for myself. For me, it was 3 weeks.
Yeah, no,
I don't know if it's like this everywhere.
It's like it in the same in Britain.
Okay,
yeah, it's now that 3 weeks just.
I think we shifted our aim maybe, or the importance of information in everything, not just in studying, but also in the whole discipline. And now we are going back to try to understand what is skill and what is craft, and we have to, well, we have to take a bypass to get the information. But starting with excavation as thinking of it as a craft is a good start, but you need more time.
Of course, yeah.
Time is a factor. It's a parameter in craft. Your body needs time to understand. And some of the things I've seen in the school for pottery, where I just was an observer, I understood years later. I had a lot of videos and I watched them again, and suddenly I saw things I didn't recognize before, because we just recognize what we already know. And if I'm too fast, I will just see what I want to see and what I already know. And then I will write about this. But if you just take more time and reflect on what you have seen, not what you think you have seen, you start to see more or to hear more and to smell more and to feel more.
I think there is a very quick remark by Matteo before Aideen with a short question. So just to give the frame. Matteo, quickly.
Yes,
Two
very
sentences.
quickly. Yeah, sorry, I didn't. So first sentence already gone. Now, I think that this regaining interest into approaching the materials in the way Nadja does can be to an extent related with the new material ton which we are experiencing in this last, 10 years. And which is a kind of, I think, regaining connection. I don't want to be naive, I may sound like that, but a kind of regaining connection with the natural world. So what I was saying also yesterday, following the talk of Professor Andenberg, we have seen a kind of trajectory of thinking towards a more Western way of looking at the separation between humans and the environment. Now we are regaining this connection. So I think that also this can be a kind of reason why we are regaining interest to this approach. Approaching materials in a different way, more using senses and touching and so on. Yes.
Thank you, Matteo. Aideen?
In the end, it's not so new at all. No, there was this article in the 70s, Archaeology as a Craft, by Michael Shanks and Maguire Gibson, I think it was. So discussion started then already. Nadja, my actual question, do you think that the concept of the chaîne opératoire is highly problematic in the context to really grasp what you have been describing, because it is making an abstract out of something that is actually very much situated in the moment, in what I'm doing, and the chaîne opératoire is merely a bad description in the end, if you look at what all goes into the details.
The chaîne opératoire is a start. It's not a completely bad start. And Michael has shown us what you can do with the chaîne opératoire. And there are a lot of possibilities how you can put more sensible information into this chain of production steps. It's just what you visually perceive at the start. So I think what Michael had shown us, the development of this concept is a chance. So I don't know if I forgot your question. So
maybe we can discuss it later in the big discussion a bit more, because I really have a problem with chaîne opératoire as a concept in general.
As a concept, yes, because it's just the visual part and nothing more. And
I would disagree. If you really go back to André Laurent-Gorin, he would never restrict it to a visual thing.
Yes.
But also he didn't apply it to archaeology, but only to anthropology, as far as I understood. And he even said, all these cognitive things we are trying to do, we don't have enough information, which is partly true. But but so it's no matter how we used it in archaeology might be reductive,
Yes.
and not the original idea.
I have already a problem with the concept of the chain as a metaphor, because it's not a chain in my opinion. It's really not a chain, and it's not, and this interlinking is so strict and makes it linear, which is, in my opinion, from my experience, what I'm doing every day is very seldom that way. But let's maybe, I don't want to, let's do it later.
That's a good topic for the Nadja.
Just a comment. The chain operator is just what happens to the matter, not what happens while you are making, not what happens inside your body. For example, the gaining of muscles and everything you need to do craft. So it's a part and it's a start. Yeah. Sorry. After this. Thank you.